While we all wait for some Kevin Durant news to come out, either being traded for Jaylen Brown or being traded for Mikal Bridges or just staying on the Nets once and for all, something else has populated, and that is this Instagram post by somebody. It got sent all over Reddit, but it's each fan base's most loved and most hated players for all 30 teams. And I figured, why not jump in, because it's the middle of the season. There's not much going on. The entire world is waiting for the deep dive series to start on August 1st. And let's see what each team's fan base's most loved and most hated players are, disagree with them, and come up with our own results, because there's a lot of stupid on this. Supposedly the results come right after Grayson Allen injured Alex Caruso, and you know how people are about Alex Caruso, how much they love him and how much they hate Grayson Allen, much to my dismay. So there's going to be a lot of Grayson Allen hate. And for basically what I'm saying is, for the hated players, it's Grayson Allen by default, and then LeBron James if they don't know who else to hate. And for the love players, it's either Ja Morant or Giannis Antetokounmpo or LeBron James. So they didn't put a lot of thought into this list. I saw some of the results. They queued and asked like 90 people or something, or 190 people. What I'm trying to say is the results are shit. So we'll go one by one, agree, disagree, and come up with the real answer. As for the Atlanta Hawks, the most loved player, I don't really know. I can't disagree with Giannis. Giannis is a likable guy. I would think that Danilo Gallinari, former Hawks legend, maybe Al Horford might be on this list, but Giannis is also, I guess, a perfectly adequate person to place. So I'm going to go and I'm going to say no to this. I'll put Al Horford here just because it comes off the top of my head. Maybe Danilo Gallinari because of the Mohawk and he just got sent away. I don't think Giannis is the most liked player. I don't think the Hawks have a most liked player. The Hawks really like their guys, and then that's it. Going on to the Boston Celtics, Nikola Jokic is... What? Why would they like Nikola Jokic other than because he's a very good basketball player? I mean, I respect Nikola Jokic. I'm sure he's a very, very liked-ish guy in Boston. Is it because he's not black? Is that it? Is it because Boston is racist? I would probably have to go either Daniel Tice, because he's always on the team that gets traded away, then comes back, then gets traded away, then comes back, then gets traded away. So Daniel Tice, or Isaiah Thomas, the legend IT, who they still have a lot of guilt, and they should, for Boston Celtics fans and the front office, for essentially fucking that man over, using him up completely while his sister died in the playoffs, and then saying, no thank you, goodbye, get off my team for Kyrie Irving, which we all know how that worked out. So if I had to choose between the two, I want to put Isaiah Thomas over there just ahead over Daniel Tice, but I guess this is all a stupid, subjective, pointless list that we're talking about. As for the Nets, I don't really know if they have a favorite player either, and I see why they put Ja Morant here. Ja Morant is electric and fun to watch. I'm going to go with basically anybody from the 2018 team. So D'Angelo Russell or Karis LeVert or Joe Harris, basically anybody when the team was still a young, fun, up-and-coming team to watch, instead of the disappointment that it is today with two stars that are not reaching their expectations. So, you know what? Fuck it. Put the entire 2018 squad as the Nets' most loved player, because there's nobody left from that squad. Everybody got traded away either for James Harden or signed and traded for Kevin Durant or cut for cap casualty. Regardless, there is nobody left on that list, not even the head coach. They brought in Steve Nash, the legend himself, dancing with his kids. On to the Charlotte Hornets. Again, the same thing. They don't really have a favorite player. I guess Kemba Walker could go here. There's a lot of fond memories of Kemba. He was basically the franchise's only good player for like 10 years, and then he left and his knees fell off. I'm fine with putting Kemba here. Again, Giannis, perfectly fine player, but you see this top row of the list. Giannis, Nikola Jokic, Ja Morant, Giannis, Ja Morant, LeBron James. These are all just players that are really good. That's it. There's no real thought going into this whatsoever, and that's why I think most of this list is dumb. Going over to the Cleveland Cavaliers makes a lot of sense. Yeah, LeBron James. He's also probably the most hated player, LeBron James, as well. So we'll put LeBron on both the most loved and most hated players. You never know with the Cleveland Cavaliers fans. Do they love LeBron? Do they hate LeBron? I don't know. Do you? Going over to the Dallas Mavericks, and we skipped over the Bulls. I'm sorry. You know what? Let's zoom in even more so that it's really pixely and really shitty looking. As for the Bulls, who's their favorite player? I think it's probably Derrick Rose or Jimmy Buckets. Again, I know Ja Morant's a very fun player to watch, don't get me wrong, but Jimmy Butler brought a sense of toughness to the team right after Derrick Rose sat out for the 17th season in a row. On the other side, Derrick Rose, probably the most loved player in their franchise since Michael Jordan. Maybe you put Joakim Noah in there. Maybe you put, I don't know, Carlos Boozer, Taj Gibson, Drew Gooden kind of guys on that list. But Derrick Rose was legendary. Derrick Rose was special. It's such a pain that he got hurt and injured and could not stay healthy, because that man was electric. youngest ever MVP. I think definitely Derrick Rose would be my pick for the Bulls' #1 fans, maybe Jimmy Butler. Going over to the Dallas Mavericks finally, and again, this team doesn't really have a favorite player, a most hated player. They're really indifferent. They like the guys that are on their team. There's not a lot of hate spewing out of their team. There's not a lot of, oh my God, I wish we had this guy back, spewing off on their team. Traded away Kristaps Porzingis. They don't really care. Lose Jalen Brunson. I mean, it's whatever. Really, the only guys that they love are people who don't play anymore, like Dirk, like Jason Terry. You know, there's a lot of guys on the team that they love and they appreciate who don't play anymore. But as far as other teams, I don't really think anybody falls on this list. So, you know, you can put Nikola Jokic. I'll put, I don't know, Jalen Brunson by default. As for the Denver Nuggets, kind of similar to the Dallas Mavericks. These small market teams really like the guys that are on their teams. There's not a lot of player movement. Most of the guys stick around. They've had Michael Porter Jr., they've had Jamal Murray, they've had Nikola Jokic for a while at this point. Maybe Will Barton, Thrill is going to be the guy that they miss the most and love the most out of all of the NBA players. Other than that, really indifferent. So if you want to put Giannis here, that's fine with you. I'm going to put Will Barton. As for the Detroit Pistons, man, they've just been bad for so long that there isn't really a team to put on this list, a player that you can really say, oh yeah, don't the Detroit Pistons miss that guy, unless you're, like the other two franchises, an old school Pistons player like Dennis Rodman, Isaiah Thomas, the whole bad boy Pistons squad, Tayshaun Prince, Ben Wallace, Rasheed Wallace, Big Shot, Chauncey Billups. I mean, any of those guys, you go, yeah, I love that player. But in today's NBA, it's just been so long since they've been a truly competitive team that you can't really say anybody. What, Blake Griffin, Andre Drummond, I mean, maybe Reggie Jackson you want to put on this list? Sure, we'll put him. Going over to the Golden State Warriors, exact same thing, kind of the flip side of the Pistons, kind of the flip side of the other teams who are bad. The Warriors have been good for so long that they don't really care about who's not on their team. They care about the guys that are here. Steph Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, Kevon Looney, Andrew Wiggins. I mean, yeah, you could talk about Kevin Durant all you want, but they love all their old guys who are on other teams, but they don't hate anybody else. I'm sure they're going to miss Gary Payton Jr., Nemanja Bjelica, Kevin Durant, Juan Toscano Anderson, Sean Livingston, James McAdoo. I mean, they've just been good for so long that they don't really care. As for the Rockets, James Harden, I guess you could put him similar to the Cavaliers, the most loved player and the most hated player in all of Houston. Again, they're just in the rebuild phase at this point. They haven't been competitive for a while. Who do you hate? Yourself for going 0 for 27 from 3. I can't really think of any players that you really love on the Houston Rockets or that's not on the Houston Rockets. I guess I'd put PJ Tucker here. That's really as good as it gets for me. Yeah, James Harden, you want to put on this list. You thank him for everything that he's done for the franchise, but you got to remember that he ate his way out of Houston, said, fuck you, gave you the middle finger and said, I don't care how many years I have left on my contract. I want out of Houston. So there's a little bit of resentment there too. As for the Pacers, I don't really know. I'm going to put Domantas Sabonis here. The Pacers have been, the Pacers for a long time at this point. There's not a lot to say. Going on to the LA Clippers, their most loved player, and it's going to be Patrick Beverley. It has to be. So many great memories with Patrick Beverley throughout the history. So many great memories of recent. Before he got traded away, he was a dog for them. He was playing when they were a young, fun team with Lou Will, with Montrezl Harrell, and Doc Rivers being the head coach. Yeah. He was playing for them when they were competitive, and then Kawhi Leonard went out with injury. Oh my God, Kawhi Leonard went out with injury. Whoa, newsflash. Going over to the Lakers and Alex Caruso, I'm perfectly fine with. There's not a lot to say. Everybody loves Alex Caruso, the meme, except me, I guess. I just don't really have that same level of affinity for an awkward white guy in basketball. But hey, everybody else does, so that's fine. The Grizzlies, same thing, other than Ja Morant, obviously. I guess Mike Conley would be the other most loved player that's not on their team because he was such a legend for them for so long. As for the Heat, their most loved player, it's got to be LeBron James. And just a sneak peek over at the other list, they say LeBron is on the most hated list. I think that's complete bullshit. The Heat are very thankful to LeBron. I know the way he left was a really shitty way, kind of ignored Pat Riley, kind of pouted and bitched his way out after going, not 2, not 3, not 4, not 5, not 6, not 7, blah, blah, blah. And then he didn't perform up to that expectation, but he was still really good for them. Brought them 2 rings, brought one of the first big threes in the modern NBA to Miami, and had just a really fun 4 seasons out there before he completely destroyed the team. So definitely LeBron James is going to be on the list. Goran Dragic, Kelly Olynyk, Kendrick Nunn, James Johnson, Jason Richardson, just a whole bunch of the guys that used to be on their team bought into the Heat culture. I think any one of those guys certainly belongs on this list more than Ja Morant or Steph Curry. Come on now. On to the Milwaukee Bucks. I don't really have anyone for them. They're another small market team. They love the guys who have been there. Do they like John Morant? Sure. Do they like Nikola Jokic? Sure, but I don't think they love him. So I mean, who's an old player that doesn't play for them anymore? Dante DiVincenzo, sure, let's put him on the list because there isn't a lot to go on with the Bucks. As for the Timberwolves, their most loved player most certainly is not John Morant. In fact, there is starting to be a budding rivalry with John Morant. So the fact that they think John Morant is the most loved player in Minnesota that's not on the Timberwolves, definitely have to disagree. Who would be their most loved player? Tough to say. I don't really think there is one because they're another small market team. I'll say, God, who cares? Gorgie Dang. Maybe Jared Vanderbilt is going to be one of their most loved players, guys who are no longer on the team. Moving on to the next, New Orleans Pelicans, Drew Holiday. I actually think they nailed this one. There isn't a lot to say. Oh, I miss that guy. Maybe Boogie Cousins for that one season. You could say Anthony Davis, but I think they really hate the way that he just left town and said, go fuck yourself. So Drew Holiday, definitely a really good player for this franchise. Could be their most loved player that's not on the team. Carmelo Anthony for the Knicks. I don't know. Nobody really counts. It's the Knicks. Going on to the Thunder, and definitely Russell Westbrook is one of their most loved players. You just see it. You love it. You hear about it all the time. The Thunder, and I think to a lesser extent the Wizards, are one of the few franchises that love Russell Westbrook for everything that he brought for their team. He stuck around. He battled it out. He won an MVP. He started making triple doubles there, and he actually used to be good at basketball when he was playing for Oklahoma City. Nowadays, not so much. For the Orlando Magic, there's a ton of players you could go for here. Nikola Vucevic makes a lot of sense. They just recently traded him away, but same with Aaron Gordon, Tobias Harris, maybe even Dwight Howard, even though Dwight Howard didn't leave on the nicest of fashions. I think any one of their old guys that's been around when the team was quote-unquote competitive or developed into really good players could be one of their most loved players that are on the other team. But again, a small market team, haven't been good for very long. Not a lot to say. Going on to the 76ers, and I got to say Jimmy Butler. I know you want to say John Morant because you have no idea what you're doing with this list. You're like, oh, I just want to make this list and get a lot of likes and followers. Well, John Morant is not going to be the answer for every single team, Jesus fucking Christ. But definitely Jimmy Butler. I can't tell you how many fans are saying, man, what if we stuck by Jimmy Butler instead of Ben Simmons, instead of Tobias Harris, instead of Al Horford? And we just said, you know what? Jimmy is the way to go. Kept him around. And probably still be competitive to this point in their franchise. Now, you could say some of the guys that they traded away as well. Maybe a JJ Redick, although he's retired. I can't think of anybody else off the top of my head. But definitely, I would say Jimmy Butler goes here. For the Phoenix Suns, tough to say. The Suns just got relevant. They've had some fun players in their past with the Eric Bledsoe, Isaiah Thomas, Goran Dragic trio at the point guard position. I'd say the Morris twins are probably the two that they would miss or love the most. That's not on their team, so I'm just going to put them. Scrolling down to the last section, the Portland Trailblazers, it's got to be CJ McCollum. CJ did so much for the franchise, was around for so long, turned himself into a really good player, an all-star, most improved player. Definitely CJ McCollum belongs. As for the Sacramento Kings, I would say either Tyrese Halliburton or Boogie Cousins is the most loved player that they had. Those two just brought so much to the franchise. Halliburton in terms of potential upside, and Boogie Cousins was an all-star. One of the few all-star that was on the Kings. He stuck around. He was one of the few players who actually wanted to be in Sacramento when he got traded away. He said, I don't care how bad this franchise is. I love this place. I love this city, and I love my team. And Sacramento gave him the middle finger. So what you going to do there? As for the Spurs, Patty Mills, I agree with that. No problems there. Any of their old guys that have gone around. Derek White could certainly make this list. DeJounte Murray, of course, getting traded away. The Spurs are really faithful to almost all of their players. As for the Raptors, Kyle Lowry, DeMar DeRozan, kind of Kawhi Leonard, Jonas Valanciunas, really anybody there could certainly belong, but I have no problems Kyle Lowry, Mr. Toronto, being on the list. As for the Jazz, it's got to be Joe Ingles. I know you put John Morant here because you don't know anything about basketball, person who made this list, but definitely Joseph Ingles is their most loved player who's currently, is he on the Bucks? I think is where he signed this offseason. And the Wizards, it's John Wall. John Wall is still a loved player in Washington. In fact, a lot of them wanted him to come back during this offseason, and he didn't. That being said, John Wall, probably one of the top players ever playing for the Washington Wizards behind Michael Jordan and maybe Gilbert Arenas. But John Wall, fan favorite still out there in Washington. Now, we went over the boring, oh, let's love and do peace and love and be great with each other. Most loved player for the fan bases. Let's go to the more interesting, most hated player for each of the fan bases. And we're going to start at the top just like we did last time. The most hated player for the Atlanta Hawks is Joel Embiid. I guess that's fine. I think mostly because Joel Embiid is a good player. That's why he would be on this list. They had their battles. You could put Julius Randle here. Just everything that went on between the Knicks franchise and the Hawks is the most heated rivalry in recent memory. And then I guess LeBron James for beating the shit out of them for so many years in a row and making them feel bad. You could put any one of those three on this list. I'm fine with Joel Embiid. We're going to rock with it. For the Celtics, Kyrie Irving certainly makes sense the way he completely destroyed that franchise. That being said, he's destroyed a lot of franchises. Is he the most hated player? You could say Steph Curry right now because of the way that Steph Curry first beat the Celtics, got all this praise, and now he's talking shit about the Celtics that he is their daddy. He's the one who said, sit the fuck down, Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, you ain't ready yet. So Steph Curry has been talking a lot of shit. I have no problems if you want to say Steph Curry is currently your most hated, like begrudgingly hated player in the NBA. Anything Lakers in general, the Celtics hate, which makes a lot of sense. So you could say LeBron, Anthony Davis, Russell Westbrook, the entire Lakers squad. And I'm throwing in a wild card there, just not as a Celtic fan myself, but somebody who was just a complete disappointment in the playoffs. Evan Fournier came over in a trade, was a complete embarrassment on the defensive end. They ran whoever offense Brooklyn did back when Brooklyn was still kind of good on Evan Fournier. And then he went and signed a huge mega deal with the New York Knicks. I think that's somebody that kind of you forget about when you're a Celtic fan because he was really irrelevant for half a season. But man, did he kind of fucking suck. As for the most hated Nets team, I'm fine with Giannis, the way that he stepped his foot under Kyrie Irving and essentially ruined their championship aspirations. I got to say James Harden is probably the person that I would hate the most if I was a Nets fan, just the way that he quit his way out of his second team in his career now. So, I mean, Giannis, James Harden, you could flip-flop between the two. Maybe we'll put Giannis, Harden as the player that they hate the most. As for the Hornets, well, there's a couple guys that are hated more than Joel Embiid. They put Joel Embiid here because Joel Embiid is good. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me. They put Nicholas Batum here. Duh. Just the way that he stole so much money. And to a lesser extent, Miles Bridges. Now, we don't really talk about Miles Bridges. It's really a slap to the face, even bringing him up. So we're just going to pretend like that man doesn't exist, and that's totally fine with me. So Nicholas Batum is going to be the most hated Charlotte Hornets. The Chicago Bulls makes a lot of sense. Grayson Allen, he injured their beloved Alex Caruso, the greatest player ever, blah, blah, blah. I still disagree personally. I like to argue intention versus result. We've seen a play like that occur 7,000 times in the regular season. I can't tell you how many highlights I've seen of LeBron James pushing people in midair and they fall completely over, fall on their back, fall on their head, almost end up with a concussion. That's just kind of the way of the fast-paced NBA is today. So I'm fine with putting Grayson Allen here. I disagree overall with what happened and why people are so mad about it. And I can understand the history. You're like, Grayson Allen has been an asshole forever, blah, blah, blah. That's fine. I have no issues with that. I would just say I rethink my anger issues if I'm thinking Grayson Allen is the worst player in the world. For the Cavaliers, LeBron James certainly belongs here. Kelly Olynyk, I get it, for yanking Kevin Love's arm out of its socket. Draymond Green for being Draymond Green, basically the entire Warriors squad as a whole. Kyrie Irving you could put here for bitching his way out initially and is effectively ruining any chance that they had of a long-running franchise with LeBron James and Kyrie Irving. Any one of those guys could be on the Cleveland Cavaliers list. Going over to the Mavericks, they have two players that they hate, Dwayne Wade and to a lesser extent Rajon Rondo. Since this list is active players, I'm fine with Rajon Rondo, but Dwayne Wade, there's still so many people who hate Dwayne Wade for everything that he did in 2006 and 2011. As for the Denver Nuggets, they don't really hate Markieff Morris. That kind of happened, and then nobody else really talked about it. Even the Heat fans don't really care that much about the Morris-Nikola Jokic beef. Morris took a cheap shot. Nikola Jokic took a cheap shot back, and Morris effectively died for an entire season from quote-unquote whiplash. I would say the person that they hate the most in their media posts has got to be Joel Embiid, and it's not hate. It's more of a begrudging rivalry. Who's the best center in the game? Who's the real MVP? And fans spouting BS, throwing numbers and statistics and advanced analytics at each other. And then Andre Iguodala certainly qualifies on this list as one of their more hated players as well. On to the Detroit Pistons. Again, they've been bad for so long that you could put anybody here. Doesn't really matter. I'd put probably Andre Drummond just because they were so annoyed that he was around for so long. Maybe Blake Griffin because he was just like, I don't want to play for you anymore. Doesn't really matter. The Pistons aren't good yet. As for the Warriors, I don't know. Kevin Durant, LeBron James, doesn't really matter. The Warriors are in a dynasty right now, effectively unrivaled. So do they really hate anybody? No. The Rockets, this is kind of dumb. They hate Draymond Green. I don't know how else to put it to you. Everybody I know, everybody I see, everybody I talk to hates Draymond Green if you're a Houston Rockets fan. To a lesser extent, Christian Wood, just because of the way that he played and effectively quit his way on the team out of Houston. James Harden, same thing. You could put any one of those three on the list, and I would agree with you a whole 100%. But hey, they say no one, guy who made this list. That's kind of stupid. On to the Pacers, LeBron James. Makes sense. I would say PG-13, maybe Victor Oladipo, just the way that those two guys asked their way, forced their way out of Indiana. Not a lot of hatred coming out of the Indiana Pacers squad. So if you want to put LeBron, that's fine with me. It's just, I don't think it's as accurate. I would put probably PG-13 here because Victor Oladipo, they did hate him initially, and then Victor Oladipo's career was ruined. So if anything, you feel bad, you feel empathetic for him. Going on to the LA Clippers. I'm fine if you think that LeBron James is the worst, most hated player ever because you have a quote-unquote Los Angeles rivalry. I just think you're wrong. Devin Booker, same thing. You don't have a rivalry there. The person that they hate the most is Joe Ingles because they believe he injured Kawhi Leonard with that bump, effectively ruining their chance of having a championship for at least 2 seasons of the prime of this franchise. So I'm putting Joe Ingles here. Lakers, they hate everyone. They hate their team. They hate your team. They hate anyone. And they especially hate Russell Westbrook. So put whoever the fuck you want here. You know how you have the Rockets, nobody. For the Los Angeles Lakers, they hate everyone. For the Memphis Grizzlies, it's pretty straightforward. They hate Iguodala. He completely quit on the team, got traded there and said, I don't want to play here, and went over to Miami instead. They absolutely despise everything Iggy. And then if you want to put Blake Griffin and Cliff Paul in their Lob City Clippers days, that certainly qualifies. You could even throw in Jordan Poole here for the way that he grabbed, quote-unquote, John Morant's knee and, quote-unquote, who knows, maybe injured it or inflamed it, whatever. But Andre Iguodala definitely is the number one most hated player in Memphis. Going on to the Heat, and the Heat don't hate LeBron. I already talked about this. He brought them 2 rings. The way he quit himself out of Miami wasn't exactly spectacular, but they don't really hate anybody in Miami. They do their own thing. They're their own culture. They play their game. They win some, they lose some. I'd probably put Jokic here just because of the way that he pushed Markieff Morris, but Markieff Morris definitely deserved it. So nobody really even talks about that anymore. So I'd put either nobody, this is where no one belongs, not in Houston, or Nikola Jokic. Onto the Bucks. There's a whole lot of guys you could put here. Now I understand James Harden for the Giannis slander for run and dunk man. The thing is, Giannis vindicated himself by winning that championship. So James Harden hasn't won a championship. James Harden looks like a bitch, and I don't think anybody loses any sleep over James Harden slandering. Marcus Smart, you could definitely put on here just because of the way that he plays, infuriates Bucks fans. Tristan Thompson for hurting Bobby Portis would make a lot of sense. Eric Bledsoe is a guy I'd throw out there because he consistently disappointed this team. Now you almost feel bad for Eric Bledsoe. He can't find his way onto an NBA roster at this point after he got traded away for Drew Holiday. So he doesn't fully belong, but he certainly is around. Goran Dragic, Grant Williams, Jay Crowder, a lot of pests that the Bucks fans hate, but I'm fine with James Harden if you want to keep it. On to the Timberwolves, and I really don't think that Timberwolves fans hate Jimmy Butler because Jimmy Butler was right. Now, he didn't match the timeline whatsoever when they traded for him. He came over and he made Karl Anthony Towns and Andrew Wiggins look like a bitch, and the problem was Jimmy Butler was right. He exposed them, and it hurt. You know, it's like ripping off a Band-Aid. You go, ow, but then you go, you know what? Yeah, that was probably the right thing to do. Karl Towns is not a number one. He's going to take bad shots. He is soft. He doesn't post up. He doesn't bully you the way Joel Embiid does. He could be the best player in the NBA if he wanted to, but he just doesn't night in, night out. As for most hated player right now, Dylan Brooks, John Morant, the Memphis Grizzlies in general, any player on that team is certainly available to be the most hated player of their fan base. I'm going to go with Dylan Brooks because he's been a major pest, a thorn in their side. Going on to the Pelicans, Anthony Davis. I think they nailed this one. He quit his way out of New Orleans, and he can't respect a man who does that. The New York Knicks, Trae Young. Not really. Honestly, the most hated player of the New York Knicks at this point is Julius Randle, but they're very comparable, very similar to the LA Lakers. Knicks fans just hate everything. So if you want to put Trae Young here, sure, that's fine. Call it a quote-unquote rivalry, the way Trae Young owns the New York Knicks. Going to the Thunder, there's 2 players, Patrick Beverley, Kevin Durant. Now, Kevin Durant is different because Thunder fans are still a little split, a little torn about him. They understand and recognize that Russell Westbrook and Kevin Durant just didn't really work. Same time, Kevin Durant went to the Warriors. I mean, what are you going to do? Patrick Beverley injured the shit out of Russell Westbrook and try to do it like 3 more times so I can completely understand Patrick Beverley being on their shit list. I would put Kevin Durant here just because he didn't get any sort of compensation back for him. And a lot of Thunder fans, understandably, are still salty about KD leaving. And then I guess the front office as well for trading away James Harden for nothing. So you could put any one of those 3 is what Thunder fans are still salty about. For the Orlando Magic, Kyle Kuzma, for the funny article that he said making fun of Orlando. Can you blame the guy? He is kind of right, but there's a lot of fuck Kyle Kuzma people out there in Orlando, and then Kyle Lowry. You know, either one of those two doesn't really matter. Orlando is an irrelevant franchise still. For the Philadelphia 76ers, this is dumb. I don't know why they put LeBron James, other than this person who made this doesn't know basketball, but there's 2 people that they hate in Philadelphia. There's Pascal Siakam, because of the moves that he did at the end of the playoffs. To a much lesser extent, there's a little Russell Westbrook back when he and Joel Embiid had a rivalry. And then there's that guy. Oh, yeah, that guy, Ben Simmons. The 76ers fans fucking hate Ben Simmons. And you know what? Basketball fans fucking hate Ben Simmons. So Ben Simmons honestly could be number 1 for every one of the teams on this list just because of how much of a huge fucking failure that man is at life and at basketball. For the Phoenix Suns, Robert Horry is the answer, but he's retired. So Pat Bev is okay the way he pushed Cliff Paul. And then really their own front office and the owner, they hate more than anybody else in the NBA. Other than that, for sure, Patrick Beverley's fine. For the Blazers, their most hated player, not really anybody. If you want to put Russell Westbrook here, I guess that's fine. It's kind of the de facto, who do you hate the most? I don't really care. As for the Kings, well, first of all, just because LeBron James is good doesn't mean the Kings hate them. If anything, they hate themselves. But if we're really naming players here that the Kings hate, number 1 is Spencer Hawes, but he's not in the league anymore. Number 2 is Jonas Valanciunas for the move that he did. And then if you want to get some other players, Marvin Bagley and Buddy Hield, they certainly hate them out there in Sacramento. And really any other of their California teams are kind of a quote-unquote rivalry to the Kings, but the Kings have been so irrelevant for so long. For the Spurs, I mean, there's 2 players in Spurs history that you hate. There's Zaza Pachulia, affectionately known as Zaza Pacheap, and there's Kawhi Leonard. And it's definitely Kawhi right now because Zaza's been out of the league for a while. And let me tell you, even I, as a non-Spurs fan, hate Kawhi Leonard and what he did to San Antonio, what he did to the franchise, effectively turning them into a mess, quitting his way out of San Antonio because he and Uncle Dennis wanted to go to Los Angeles. For the Raptors, their most hated player is not Kyrie Irving. I don't know why Kyrie Irving is on this list. I think something came out at this time that Kyrie did or said something and people were like, oh my God, I don't like you and I'm in Toronto. But really it's LeBron James, mostly for owning them for so long. And then Joel Embiid, and then kind of Kawhi Leonard for leaving, and also Goran Dragic for getting traded and not playing. There's not a lot of hatred going on in Toronto. Kyrie Irving, though, really fucking terrible decision here. For the Utah Jazz, it's Enes Kanter. You could say James Harden and Chris Paul to a lesser extent, but it's definitely Enes Freedom. Enes Kanter. What is his name now? I don't remember. I think Enes Freedom. And as for the Washington Wizards, it's nobody really. If you want to put Kelly Olynyk here, sure, that's fine. Why don't you put Grayson Allen or LeBron James too? So that is our revamped, updated, most hated players list for every team in the NBA and the most loved players. Let me know what your thoughts are, what you agree with, what you disagree with, and I'll catch you in the next one.